Hi, this is Greg Holcomb with Andrew Moylan with the R Street Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy research organization here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for coming. First, go ahead and talk about R Street. Tell us a little bit about what the organization is and what you do.
So the R Street Institute is a free market think tank. We're relatively new, about 4 years old now. And we engage in public policy research on a wide variety of different topics, and we try to identify pragmatic, real life solutions to some of those challenges. It's easy enough to do the ivory tower thing, but trying to apply these solutions to real life is our goal. And we do that in a wide range of things, including a lot in the sharing economy, and obviously short-term rental has been a big focus of ours lately.
Great. So you took on a project called the RoomScore 2016 and dealing with short-term rental regulations across the country. Could you tell us a little bit about what that project was and how it came about?
So the way it came about is actually from our work on ride sharing. So a lot of people are familiar with Uber and Lyft and services like that. And we engaged in a similar scoring effort where we looked at, in that case it was 50 of the top cities in the country, and tried to grade them on their regulatory climates for hire transportation. And as we were working more and more on short-term rental issues as well, we thought, we could do that same sort of a project here in short-term rental, because there's a real dearth of information. There's not a lot of good analysis out there about what the legal climate looks like in cities across the country. And so we sat down and we started digging through, city statutes and everything we could find, and ultimately put together a scorecard that covers 59 cities of the largest cities in the country. We called it RoomScore, and basically what we did is we graded each of them on what we thought, how close or how far they are from having a reasonable climate that fosters the growth and innovation that's happening in the short-term rental world now.
Sure. What were some of the topics that you looked at when looking at the city regulations to base your scores?
So, excuse me, there are a couple of different categories we looked at. The first one is just the threshold question of, is it legal to engage in short-term rental in this city or in this locality? And unfortunately, the answer is in some places it's not. It's technically against the rules, or the city they evaluate their existing rules so as to make it impossible for people to engage in it. So that was sort of the first question. Once we get past that first question, if it is in fact legal in some circumstances, then we started looking at, well, what are the restrictions here? Are there restrictions based on zone, on type of housing, on hosted rentals versus non-hosted rentals, on how much parking there is or how many bedrooms you can rent out? What kind of treatment is there for tax collection, if any? What kinds of inspections are required? What kinds of licenses are people required to engage in? And so we tried to cover the gamut of all of the potential hoops that one might have to jump through in order to engage in short-term rental, to try to quantify all of that so that we could get a sense for how one city on the West Coast compares to one on the East Coast and all these other places, because it's hard to have, we didn't have that sort of analysis before. And so that was our goal, was to sort of put together that map, and that's what became RoomScore.
Oh, great. Did you see anything emerge, any kind of trends that you saw across the country as you were looking at the different types of regulations, things that were appearing more often than not, whether they be good or bad?
We did, unfortunately. So we've often said that short-term rental is kind of an immature policy environment, and what we mean by that is that there are a wide variety of different approaches. There are a wide variety of, unfortunately, different restrictions and ways that cities, in our opinion at least, do a bad job of fostering short-term rental. And in a lot of ways that bears resemblance to the early stages of the ride-sharing debate with Uber and Lyft and those sorts of services, that you had cities that were taking these sort of scattershot approaches. And nowadays, that debate has really kind of consolidated on an approach that basically legalizes the services, has some insurance requirements and other things. I think we're eventually going to be driving toward that in short-term rental, but as it stands right now, we have a lot of cities that are sort of banning first and asking questions later. Unfortunately, we have a lot of cities that place really onerous restrictions in terms of licensure, requiring multiple licenses just to engage in short-term rental in the first place, or other kinds of really just nuisance requirements. These are not things that serve some real safety or public policy goal, but are just things that make it difficult to engage in the service at all. And a lot of that, I'm sure, is a result of lobbying pressure that cities are getting. And so there are all kinds of those, whether it's, I mentioned the licensure stuff, whether it's inspections, particular things relating to, limits on the number of square feet that one can rent out, or one that I'm sure is a major issue for you and for your members is requiring property managers to live within a certain distance, or at least to be physically, accessible within a certain distance. Those kinds of things, a lot of which are just these kind of nuisance regulations. So we've seen a lot of that, unfortunately, and so our hope is, we tried to kind of put this map together to see what things look like, and our hope is that once we find some of the good models, which there are some, that we can take those good models and start to utilize those across the country and really drive toward a better climate in this very complicated policy realm.
I think that kind of transitions into my next question, which was going to be how can one of my members watching this video, how they could utilize the RoomScore document when they go to talk to policymakers locally.
So the easiest way, the website is just roomscore.org, ROOM score SCORE.org. And you can go and you can dig down into any level of detail that you want. So if you just want the map of the country and see, a basic kind of thumbnail sketch of what's going on, that's right there on the front. If you want to dig down and read the long paper that we wrote, if you want to look at all the sources for data, that kind of thing, you can really dig down. So if you want to figure out what it is that led us to, give the city that you're in a B- or a D+ or whatever it is, you can dig in and do that. But the big thing that I would think would be helpful for your members and people who are engaging in these policy fights across the country is to find some of these good models, some of these cities that have done pretty well, at least in our estimation. And there are a handful of those, and figure out what it is that they're doing that leads them to get pretty good scores and leads them to have pretty vibrant short-term rental markets. And there are some places like that, and we can talk about a few of them. But the sort of basic hallmarks are, these are cities that, first of all, they don't ban short-term rental, obviously. Second, they generally have a tailored legal framework that affirmatively legalizes short-term rental services, and then sets up some conditions that make it easy to comply with the rules. And the rules that they have are not these onerous sort of nuisance restrictions, but are a few basic things. Most people can handle getting one business license or even collecting taxes, if they're required to in a certain city without too much trouble, but all the additional inspections and other things become a problem. And so looking at a couple of those examples and pointing to how they've been successful, I think would be a good way to try and deliver that message in a place where they're having a battle about that.
Kind of to wrap all this up, if you were to recommend to a community, just a general community that's out there, city or town, county, putting together some regulations, what are some of out of what you found, the best practices that would probably be, common sense, easy for someone to follow, whether they be a professional manager or even a home sharing host? What would some of those policies look like? So
there's kind of a checklist, if you will, and in terms of cities that I think are good examples of this, I often point to Galveston, Texas, and Savannah, Georgia are the two that got the highest grade on our RoomScore analysis, and I think do the best job overall. And here's why they do the best job, at least in our estimation. Step one is that they have tailored frameworks on the books that say, we recognize that short-term rental is a real thing, that it's a growing source of income for people, and there's a lot of economic innovation that's going on around this. And so many cities and states have no laws on the books that even contemplate the notion of renting something for less than 30 days or 90 days. So these places have a law in the books that says, we recognize short-term rental is a thing. It's legal, and here's how we're going to regulate it. And then when they go into spelling out those regulations, they're really pretty simple overall. They have relatively simple licensure requirements, having just a basic business license. And importantly, one of the things that we looked at in the analysis is not just having few licenses for people to get, but making sure that the cost to get that license is not prohibitive. Because if you have to pay $1,000 to get a license, somebody who wants to rent their home out for a single event, I live in the DC area, for the inauguration, right? If I wanted to do it just for that and get out of town for what's going to be a crazy weekend and earn some income. So ensuring that the licensure costs are not too high as well. Making sure that if there is a requirement to collect taxes, and some cities do and some cities don't, but if a city does require somebody to collect taxes for short-term rental services, making sure that it's simple to comply and that they have the responsibility for tax collection ultimately falls on the person who's renting out the property, and because it's their responsibility to make sure that they're complying with that rule, and that they don't have a lot of these sort of, in our mind at least, unnecessary nuisance restrictions for, it doesn't make sense to have a requirement to have fire suppression in every room in somebody's home. We don't require that of anybody's individual home, and it doesn't make sense for most short-term rentals. And so making sure that there aren't those kinds of requirements or parking requirements or restrictions or all these other kinds of things. There are a lot of issues, whether it's noise or traffic or parking or things like that people sometimes wrap up with short-term rental regulation, which are really best dealt with in other parts of law. If you want to make sure that traffic is manageable, if you want to make sure that noise is manageable, we have traffic and noise restrictions on the books, and that's where we should be dealing with that stuff. So Galveston and Savannah do a good job by not generally wrapping up all of these other unrelated issues in the short-term rental framework itself. And so that's kind of a basic guideline that we think cities should follow. But the even broader than that, there are unfortunately some cities that show this sort of hostility to short-term rental services. But Galveston and Savannah have shown, based on obviously on the fact that they have these good laws, but also the way the debates have gone, that they've sort of embraced that as an opportunity, that these are places where they have said, no, we think that this is an opportunity for our community, for individuals, for entrepreneurs, to be able to earn some income, to be able to use their property differently or better. And it's an opportunity for our community to bring more people in, to take advantage of these new services that are growing. And so many places look at it as some sort of a threat or something to be feared and managed and contained. And while there is obviously a role for public policy in setting out the basic rules, it's encouraging to see some places like Galveston and Savannah and some others that recognize that this is a real opportunity for people too, that it's an opportunity not just for individuals, but also for the city government to have that entrepreneurial activity, which brings in more people, more revenue, more business to businesses in the community. And so there are guidelines that you can look at in terms of the scoring categories and in RoomScore that can give you a sense of what to look for, both in your own city's existing regulations, but also in the debate that's happening over how to change those regulations. Those categories give you some ideas of what to look for and how to sort of engage in trying to chart a way toward a path that leads to an end result that's more like a Galveston and less like some of these other cities like Austin or others that unfortunately have basically moved toward effectively banning the service.
Great. Well, I have to say, on behalf of our members, we thank R Street for all the work they've done on this report. It's a very in-depth, great report, a lot of information, very useful for people to go to their city councils or county boards, what have you, to fight the restrictive regulations. And this has been Andrew Moylan, Executive Director of R Street, and thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.